What's up guys, Jay here, and today is the next step on our journey where we cover all the various mission types in DeepRockGalactic. In today's video, we're going to cover the details and intricacies of the escort duty mission type. We're going to cover the basics of what the process of completing an escort duty is like, the finer details and hidden intricacies that come with it, and some recommendations and guidelines on the way that each class functions on this particular mission. Lastly, we'll talk about the overall difficulty of escort duty missions and how they compare with the other types in the game. If you're new to the series, we've already covered both the mining expedition and egg hunt missions already, so check out those videos if you have not yet. But if you guys are ready, let's talk about the mission type in which you protect by far the most important member of DeepRockGalactic, the escort mission. By the way, if you want to see more gaming videos, subscribe to the channel, that way it's easier to find my content.
Mission selected and locked in. Time to board the drop pod.
So you're going through an escort mission in DeepRockGalactic. Well, escort duties are a little more complicated than the mission types we've covered so far. There's a much more involved process than simply collecting a required number of a specific mineral and then extracting. The goal in an escort mission is to maintain and escort a large drill dozer, named Dorretta, until it reaches what is called an Amaran Heartstone. Dorretta will move on her own, cutting through the cave walls, and during this time, waves of enemies will constantly attack her. As the mission progresses, she'll eventually run out of fuel and stop in a large cave. At this point, the 2 fuel canisters on the back of Dorretta will become accessible. You'll need to use these canisters to collect oil shale, a material used to fuel the drill dozer. Once both of the canisters are full and re-injected into the dozer, it will continue its operation after pressing the button. At the Amaran Heartstone itself, the drill will start piercing the shell, and the players will need to defend Dorretta further. Once the shell is cracked, the Amaran core can then be collected and literally strapped onto Molly. Then you are finally cleared for extraction. Now I know that's a lot to take in at once, but you can simplify it down to 4 simple steps. Protect the drill dozer, refuel it when needed, defend it while it cracks the shell, and then deposit for extraction.
Time to earn your paycheck, team. Got a doozy of a swarm on the way.
Escort duty missions have significantly more intricate details than the mining expedition and egg hunt missions. There are more things to be aware of while you are going through the steps of the mission, so I'll try to break down as much information as I can. First, like every mission type, it's good to know how much you'll actually be defending the drill dozer on the way to the Heartstone. As usual, these parameters are determined by the mission length and cave complexity. In the case of escort missions, these determine the number of times Dorretta will run out of fuel and need to be recharged, which can be either 1 or 2 times. The next thing to keep in mind is what happens in between refueling sessions, and as you could probably guess, you'll be fighting a lot of bugs that are constantly trying to destroy the drill dozer. The health of the dozer is segmented into 3 parts: the left side, the right side, and the body. The left side will take damage first until it breaks, followed by the right side and then the body. Damage dealt to any part of the drill dozer will only affect the active segment. However, it can only be repaired from the area of the drill dozer it maps to. When a segment reaches 0% health, that segment cannot be repaired anymore and the next segment will begin to take damage. If the drill dozer's body runs out of health completely, the mission fails. Another thing to note is that the drill dozer's speed is determined by how many creatures and dwarves are nearby. The more creatures are present, the slower it will move, leaving it vulnerable to attack. As I said before, when the drill dozer runs out of fuel, it must be refueled. This is done by using the fuel canisters taken from the back of Dorretta. The beams emitted from the canisters liquefy the oil shale, which automatically collects the fuel. Oil shale can be found around the terrain as large, dark bluish mounds of rock, making them pretty easy to find, especially in certain biomes. Once a canister is filled, it must be inserted back into the drill dozer. When both canisters are reinserted, the drill dozer must be manually restarted to continue. Finally, the drill dozer will eventually arrive at the Amaran Heartstone, a very large, very ominous spherical shell. The drill dozer must be manually restarted to begin drilling into the Heartstone. The Amaran shell's life bar is divided into 4 phases. Each time a phase ends, the Heartstone releases an explosion which will heavily damage the players the closer they are to the drilled part of the core. Phase 1 will simply trigger an enemy swarm to spawn. In Phase 2, the stone summons floating rocks to slam into Dorretta. Somehow. These deal extreme damage but can be shot and destroyed before they hit the dozer. Phase 3 will cause another swarm trigger with increased enemy presence. Finally, Phase 4 starts spawning large destructible crystal towers which fire laser beams at the dozer, dealing constant damage, as well as constantly spawning enemies. Once Phase 4 is done, the Heartstone will emit a massive shockwave that instantly kills all nearby enemies. The Heartstone can then finally be extracted and strapped onto the back of Molly. In the process of the explosion, Doretta's head actually pops off and can be carried by someone. I cannot stress enough how important it is that you take Dorretta with you when you leave. She did so much for you during this whole mission that you can't just abandon her like that.
Your workforce is about to get bigger. Dwarf inbound.
Now that we've gone through the mound of details pertaining to the escort duty mission, let's talk about the classes and what they can provide in terms of use and effectiveness in this particular mission, as well as if any specific class has an incredibly useful position in regards to utility. This is another mission type where each class has a lot of utility and effectiveness, and really everyone has something useful to bring. If I had to pick one, I would say the gunner is probably the one that sees the most use here personally. But with that in mind, let's go through each class and talk about the kind of utility they provide, as well as if they do anything special for these missions. The driller has a special place in the roster for escort missions. Unfortunately, he doesn't have quite as much of an opportunity to use his power drills too much, as Dorretta kinda does that for him. But he can still use them to help get to any annoying oil shale locations, and what's more, he can actually use them to very easily destroy the crystal towers that spawn during the final fight. The gunner, like I said, is most likely the key player in these mission types. Firstly, because there are just so many enemies that you fight on this mission, his high amount of raw firepower is incredibly useful. He can just sit on the top of Dorretta and mow down huge numbers of enemies. What's even more interesting is, similar to the driller, he also has an easy way to deal with the large crystals in the final fight. He can shoot the very tip of the crystal with explosive damage, which will actually stop it from shooting. Also, his shield can be very useful in this mission, as it can be very effective at keeping the bugs off of Dorretta. The scout has an interesting and important position during the escort mission. Since the drill dozer automatically goes through the caves, it can be difficult to keep up with collecting minerals and resources throughout the mission if you're not in one of the resupply phases. I don't know about you guys, but a lot of the times when I go through these missions, the team usually runs out of ammo and we don't have nearly enough nitro to call in a resupply. The scout can help rectify this issue by taking the responsibility of making it a point to collect as much nitro and other materials while the dozer is moving. Since his grappling hook can help him close the distance back to the team, he doesn't have to worry too much about being left behind. Finally, the engineer has multiple ways that he can assist the team. First, thanks to his natural defensive capabilities, he is very adept at defending Dorretta both during the refueling phases and the final conflict. His sentries are great powerhouses for these missions, as they can be useful at pretty much every stage of the mission. Personally, I feel that the 2-sentry mode has a lot more use than the single one, since there is just such a large mass of enemies here, but whichever one you want will work. In terms of weaponry, really anything can be used to good effect here, but I've experienced that the breach cutter works wonders, since the tunnels that Dorretta creates forces the enemies to make perfect lines for you to take out. Now that we've gone through each of the classes individually, let's sum up the whole thing. The gunner and engineer will be working together a lot to protect the drill dozer from the near constant stream of enemy bugs, with the gunner being most effective when Dorretta is moving and the engineer having more use while she's refueling. Meanwhile, the scout should be focused on keeping the team stocked up on nitra, as well as collecting the resources that the rest of the team can't get to because they're too busy protecting Dorretta. Finally, the driller's primary goal is to make sure that the team has easy access to the oil shale deposits during the refueling phases, as well as making short work of the crystal towers during the final encounter. As always, these roles are not set in stone and can be adjustable. If you feel the situation calls for it because of another objective or event, you can always just adapt. Just remember for these missions that if you are ever confused on what to do, it's always a safe bet to fall back and protect Dorretta.
Impeccable work. You're making good progress.
Now that we've gone over the escort mission as a whole and talked about the classes and how they can contribute to its success, let's talk about where the escort mission stands when compared to the other mission types. Remember that each mission type gets 3 different ratings, one for difficulty, one for how fun it is, and one for complexity, each with a value of 1 to 5, 1 being low and 5 being high. Remember again that these ratings are just my personal take on this, so if you think it should be higher or lower, that's perfectly fine. First, in terms of difficulty, I'm going to give it a 4. This mission can be difficult because it's one of the few mission types that you can actually fail without the whole team wiping. If Dorretta is fully destroyed, the mission is over. This means you have to constantly keep tabs on her and commit someone to maintaining her. Also, the final engagement at the Heartstone can be quite challenging since it lasts so long and is split into multiple sections. Next, in terms of complexity, it's going to get a 3 because there are a lot of moving parts to this mission. Literally. Since Dorretta is almost constantly moving, you don't have the usual luxury of going on the mission at your own pace. Dorretta sets the pace and you have to follow suit. The refueling phases and the final defense stages mix things up and require you to be proactive and aware of what's going on. No longer is it simply collect, deposit, and extract. Finally, for the enjoyment rating, I'm actually going to give it a 5, because personally this is one of my favorite mission types to do. It has a lot of action with the sheer amount of enemies you face, so it's never boring. Also, each of the phases feel different enough that it helps to break up the pace and give you something new to do. Also, this mission does a good job of making you feel like you completed a lot. When the Heartstone shell finally opens and that big explosion happens, you really feel a sense of accomplishment. So that about covers the basics of how to go through an escort mission, and hopefully now you guys have a better understanding of what to expect when going into them. So what do you guys think? Did I miss anything? Let me know down below. Anyway, I hope you guys found this video helpful. Please be sure to give it a like because it tells me which types of videos you guys want to see. Thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you next Friday for another video.